Yo, what's going on, YouTube, and welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte, and today, oh boy, here we go. It's the annual The Flyers Suck video. So, my Flyers fans, listen, I get your frustration. Once again, the Flyers, see, what makes this worse, I think, for the Flyers, so you can look at this one of two ways. The first way is, okay, at least we didn't get to Christmas with any hope, right? That's the good news. The bad news is, for the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season in October, they actually gave you a little hope just to give you a thought that the Flyers might actually turn things around this year. A new head coach, Carter Hart, looks to be back to his form from where he was in his early days as a rookie in his first couple seasons. And then, right, the Flyers reminded themselves that they are indeed the Philadelphia Flyers led by Chuck Fletcher and have kind of played like that. Look at the Philadelphia Flyers for context. So right now, they are 7, 10, and 5 on the season with 19 points, which is 7th in the Metropolitan Division that they currently reside in. You look at a couple of key things here, and obviously the big one being at the making of today's video, they are on a 10-game losing streak. That's right, a 10-game losing streak for the Philadelphia Flyers, and we have not even hit Game 30 of this season. A little bit more context, the last win that the Philadelphia Flyers had was back on November 8th of 2022, which at this point, by the time you guys watch this video, it'll be 20 days since the Philadelphia Flyers last won a hockey contest. Absolutely incredible. And they found ways to lose in many different ways. Their first loss was against the Columbus Blue Jackets, a 5-2 loss there, a 4-1 and 5-1 losses in a pair of games against the Ottawa Senators and the Dallas Stars. They went on a little road trip. They lost again to the Blue Jackets, who are at the bottom of this division. That's right, they lost both their contests so far against the Jackets. 5-4 loss, but at least they lost that in overtime, so maybe there was a little bit more effort than their first 3 games in the losing streak. But they still lose. They lose to the Boston Bruins 4-1. They lose in a shootout against the Montreal Canadiens up in Montreal, a 5-4 loss in that one. They lose 5-2 at home against the Calgary Flames, a 3-2 loss, a back-breaking loss, a late goal by the Washington Capitals. The Caps win that game in overtime. And then it just kind of continues to crumble from there. A 4-1 loss on a matinee game, Black Friday, a Philadelphia tradition there in Broad Street and the city of Philadelphia. The Flyers hosting that Black Friday game against their arch Keystone State rival, the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Penguins go in there and pretty much handle them in a sold-out Wells Fargo Arena by a score of 4-1. So now they're on a 9-game losing streak going into Long Island, where they have to take on the New York Islanders on the road at UBS Arena, and I was lucky enough to go to that game. And I'm going to tell you, and I don't think this is anything Flyers fans that are keen on their team were too shocked by, but I haven't really watched the Flyers much this year. Fittingly, considering they're on a 10-game losing streak, they haven't necessarily been on the top of my list of teams to watch. Oh man, that first 10 minutes, I thought the Islanders were going to win that game 5-0 in the first period. The Flyers came out flat, like completely flat. Both teams coming off of the second game of a back-to-back. Coming to Long Island, the Islanders were not home. They were up in Columbus. So if anything, the Flyers had the easier travel than the Islanders getting to the Islanders' home arena, which should have been an advantage for the Flyers. Not the case at all. They really struggled in that first period, but they were able to draw it even at 1-1, and they're kind of lucky they were able to get even at the end of the first period because they looked awful. Second period, different tide. The Flyers actually looked pretty good in that game in the second period and was kind of concerning as an Islander fan. And then we get to the third period, and the Islanders start shooting the puck on Sandstrom. And listen, guys, I hate to rip on a young goalie that's probably around my age, but Sandstrom does not look good. And you know what? You look at his record. Again, that only means so much. It's a team stat. He is 1-5-1 as a starter for the Philadelphia Flyers. That is just not going to cut it. That's right. 1 win, 5 regulation losses, and 1 overtime or shootout loss. It's not going to cut it. It's not good enough in the National Hockey League, and I don't think anybody is going to really debate that all that much. But with that said, in front of a pretty packed out, sold out UBS Arena, the Philadelphia Flyers kind of were a no-show at the end of the day. They did show some fight at the end, throwing a couple hits around, Delorier, D'Angelo, but it was kind of all for naught because they still lost the game 5-2 pretty convincingly, considering going into the third period, it was actually a pretty tight game. Now, there's a critical stretch for the Flyers, and, you know, this is something where they have their next 5 games at home. And if things don't turn around, the Boo Birds will be in Philadelphia and will let the Flyers know their frustration with this team. Like I said, on a 10-game losing streak. But there's hope. If there's any way to console that, like I said, a 5-game homestand here at Wells Fargo Arena. Start off with a big one as the second in a home with those New York Islanders. This is like, I mean, you don't want to put so much emphasis on a game in at the end of November, but this game against the Islanders could be it for the Flyers, as crazy as that sounds, because unfortunately they don't have a ton of reinforcements. This is a team that has been banged up with injuries really since the beginning of last season, and they've never really caught a break since then. They've traded out players, guys like Giroux, that were their bona fide players, so they've only gotten worse since last year. So this is a team that, again, if they don't find a way to turn it around on this homestand, it is going to be very difficult. And what makes it more difficult is the teams they have to play. Yes, it is 5 games at home. Don't think they're going to be easy games at home. They play the New York Islanders, which obviously we just saw how they were kind of handled in that third period. The Tampa Bay Lightning. The New Jersey Devils, who are not the same Devils you've seen over the last couple years. This is end of Marty Brodeur era New Jersey Devils. They are a very good hockey team, and Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier and that whole group there in New Jersey, Jesper Bratt, not a fun team to play against. It doesn't get any easier, though, because then they welcome in the defending Stanley Cup champion, Colorado Avalanche, and then they play the Washington Capitals, hoping to get some redemption on the Caps in the beginning of December. And again, there's a couple of Metropolitan Division opponents in that stretch. The Islanders, the Devils, and the Caps. So 3 of those 5 games in the homestand, those are potentially 10 points that they could be giving up or potentially gaining ground back again on some of those teams. And that's why this stretch with the Islanders is kind of critical, because you look at the fact that there's a home and home with the Islanders. The Islanders basically have taken 4 points from the Flyers already this season. They picked up 2 of their own, and the Flyers picked up none. So, mathematically, again, that's a 4-point game. You have another 4-point game against the Islanders on Tuesday. This is as critical as it gets for the Flyers. And I don't know how they're going to necessarily get out of it. Like I said, and then they go to the West Coast right before Christmas. They play Vegas, Arizona, Colorado, which honestly, somehow that might be the best thing for the Flyers right now. Then they host New Jersey. They play the Rangers and Blue Jackets at home before going on another 5-game road trip to end out 2022. So it's going to be a tough schedule at the end of the month, or at the end of this year, really, for 2022 for the Philadelphia Flyers. That's why these next 5 games are kind of critical for this team. Now, the problem is, like I said, this is a team that has a ton of injuries. Going all the way back, obviously the big one, Ryan Ellis, that was announced back last year. He had a pelvis injury. He has not really been really available since then. He's been placed on the injured reserve. A couple of a little bit more recent than that, Sean Couturier, that was back in September. He had a back injury. He's been placed on injured reserve. He's expected to miss the next 3 to 4 months of action, so probably somewhere around the February-March timeline, which at that point, the Flyers might be dead in the water by that point anyway. He might not even play this year, maybe a couple games just to kind of get back in the rhythm of the game and kind of getting that muscle memory back. That might be important for Coots, but again, might be a dead season by then anyway. Bobby Brink with a hip injury. He has been placed on the injured reserve. Cam Atkinson back in October had an upper body injury. Tortorella said there's no update on Atkinson's injury, and there's really been no updates since then back in October. November 15th, and that's a more recent one. Wade Allison with an oblique injury. The Flyers placed Wade Allison on injured reserve. Travis Konechny with an upper body injury. Chuck Fletcher said Konechny is expected to miss 10 to 14 days, so we will probably see him right around Christmas time, right that week before Christmas, the last second or third week of December. Scott Lawton also out with an upper body injury. The Flyers play Scott Lawton on injured reserve. And, of course, back at the end of October to cap things off, James Van Riemsdyk with a finger injury. The Philadelphia Flyers have also placed James Van Riemsdyk on the injured reserve, and he is expected to miss at least 6 weeks. So right there, you look at that list of Philadelphia Flyers, it's a pretty lengthy list. 8 injuries currently on the Philadelphia Flyers roster, and at least 6 or 7 of those guys are on the injured reserve currently. So things are tough in Philadelphia. The Flyers are struggling. They're facing adversity. A lot of kids coming up from the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. You're expecting a lot from guys that you really are. Again, this was the theme of the Flyers last year, was they were relying too much on guys from Lehigh Valley coming up and having to produce. And this is kind of what you've gotten from that. We're seeing a lot of Jackson Cates, Kiefer Bellows, Tanner Lashinsky, Lucas Sedlak, Max Willman. These are guys that are like tweener NHL players. So you again, they haven't produced, and again, they haven't been in a spot where they can succeed. You can't even necessarily completely blame it on those players, because the current way that the Flyers are playing is not a recipe for success for them. They aren't being put in spots where they can succeed. And that's kind of the difference between, say, the Philadelphia Flyers and a team like Tampa. Because a team like Tampa over the last couple of years has always had depleted rosters, right? They've lost Kucherov. They've lost Stamkos. And yes, they have other players that can fill those roles. And that's really what it comes down to. You need that depth at the higher end of your lineup. And the Flyers just don't have that. And again, like I said, a lot of those guys have been injured, which obviously doesn't help. But the Flyers, I hate to break it, and this isn't shocking to anybody, they're just not a good hockey team. They have one player that is at a point per game this season. Actually, 2. Make that 2. Travis Konechny with 19 points in 17 games, and Kevin Hayes, who has 22 points in 22 games this season. That's it. Everybody else on the Flyers is below a point per game, and you're not seeing enough production from some of those guys. Now, again, there is some hope. Joel Farabee, Owen Tippett, Noah Cates has actually played decent, considering he's played 22 games. But again, you're expecting too much from a guy like Jackson or Noah Cates. The Cates brothers, again, those are guys that you shouldn't be expecting to be producing at a point per game. It's just not realistic. And again, when you look at guys that you've lost, like Claude Giroux last year, when you traded him, you weren't able to replace him with anybody. And that's kind of where the Flyers are having more issues than last year. Because now, not only are you injured and stuff like that, but you don't have the depth up front to get things back going. And I hate to say it, their goaltending hasn't been great either. And that's including Carter Hart now. Felix Sandstrom, though, listen, I hate to bust his balls here, but he has been awful for the Flyers. Like I said, 1-5-1 in 8 starts. He was pulled in one of his 8 starts. He's got an .889 save percentage, which is well below the league average, well above goals against average, well above the league average. It is just hell for the Philadelphia Flyers right now. And it's definitely got to be frustrating, because Carter Hart, despite struggling with a 6-5-4 record this season, he has a .915 save percentage and a 2.91 goals against average, which under 3, especially in today's game, is not necessarily that bad. Again, the Flyers, it's just been a rough season for them, and again, I just don't see how things are going to get better. And it's frustrating because you guys remember that video I did in October. The Flyers are playing well. Look at this. This is a team that might actually compete and might actually be able to turn things around under new head coach John Tortorella. And fortunately, things have died off since then. They were 5-2-1, 8 games into the season, looking pretty comfortable, pretty confident. That has completely been dismantled, and this is part of the issue. Is John Tortorella was supposed to come in there, and they just have not fixed anything. Like he's trying to establish that culture, and it just hasn't worked. And unfortunately for the Flyers, this is a team that, like I said, unless we see miraculous standing on his head goaltending every night from Carter Hart, you're expecting way too much from him. The defense isn't good enough. They're not scoring enough goals. This is a team that's going to struggle this year. So get ready for Connor Bedard, because I think most Flyers fans have kind of submitted another season of the NHL season. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. What do you guys think of the Philadelphia Flyers? Is it a dead season? Are you already getting ready for that number 1 draft pick, Connor Bedard? Let me know your guys' thoughts. Guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time.